Welcome to the Everyday Warrior podcast, where we talk free to break free. As someone who's been told they talk too much, can speak with a mouthful of marbles, and might just be able to sell ice to Eskimos, I have found the perfect space to speak my truth and dive into deep conversations. This podcast is about celebrating everyday warriors, the people who face life's challenges head on, breaking through obstacles to build resilience, strength, and courage. Join me, your host, Trudy Marie, as I sit down with inspiring individuals who have fought their own battles and emerged stronger, sharing raw, real, and authentic stories that make you laugh, cry, debate, wonder, intrigue, feel all the emotions, and get curious about life with. This is a safe space to explore, question, and find your own path to new possibilities. Let us all embrace the warrior within and realize that while no one is walking in your shoes, others are on the same path, journeying through life together. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain themes may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritise your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Love the Everyday Warriors podcast? You can support the show for as little as $5 with a one-time donation or by becoming a monthly subscriber. Your contribution helps me continue bringing you inspiring stories of everyday warriors who overcome challenges to find strength, resilience, and new possibilities in life. Head to the link to buy me a coffee and fuel the next episode. Every bit counts. If you're looking for an inspiring story of resilience, healing, and rediscovering yourself, my book, Everyday Warrior, is for you. It's my memoir of hiking the 1,000-kilometre Bibbulmun track, a journey that was as much about finding my way back to myself as it was about conquering the trail. Through the highs, lows, and everything in between, this book shares my raw and honest experience of overcoming trauma and embracing the strength within. Grab your copy now. Just head to the link in the show notes and let's take this journey together. Welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Warriors podcast. And today is another solo episode as I take you through part 7 of my 8-part series of working with WA Police. And today I am going to be talking about my final station, and I thought I was going to struggle with the last location and talking about that. And somehow I think that I may struggle a little bit more with this one, but we will see how we go. So while I was in Leonora beginning to suffer mentally, I needed to find a place for us to go. Before we asked for a compassionate transfer back to Perth, I wanted to see if there was someone else we could go regionally, perhaps with a tenure lifted position, because normally with WA Police, you do sign a 2-year contract at a location, but often where there are hard to fill locations or for a particular reason of the agency, they will have what they call tenure lifted positions. So anybody can apply and you can leave your tenure. Jobs are always posted every Friday. That's around the state in all ranks. And I remember standing in the station at Leonora on a Saturday morning, and I'd said to hubby, we need to get out of here before I have a mental breakdown. And before we ask for that compassionate transfer, I want to see what's out there, if there is anything available for us to go. Lo and behold for us, there were multiple tenure lifter positions at Narrogin. Now, my first thought was, fuck, I hope this is not a dodgy location, a bad location, because when you see that many tenure lifter positions, you always have to question it. However, it seemed that just there was a period where people had been promoted to detective, people had been promoted to other locations and were transferring out. So it just meant that they had a really quick turnaround and they needed to get replacements back in the station quickly. So that's why we applied for Narrogin and got Narrogin. Now, this I thought would work really well, as I had visited Narrogin while I was working on the project. It was one of the stations I went through for the training, and it was only 2 hours from Perth. So I knew it was closer to a support network, especially our children. So after the 12-week wait, we were transferred, and Narrogin was a station that was like 3 times larger than Leonora. So I thought that new faces, a change of scenery, it would all bring about a fresh start. But how wrong was I? Now, the WAPOL grapevine, as I've spoken about in the past, had beaten me there. And despite actually arriving and knowing 2 people at the station who were from my sister squad when I was at the academy, my name was Mud. And I did not realise how much this would actually impact. I honestly thought that, maybe a couple of people might be a bit standoffish, but it was practically the whole frickin' station. And I was like angry to begin with, because I was like, really, we're all adults here and this type of behaviour still goes on. But 2, I was like, far out. I have been thrown out of the frying pan into the fire, like literally. So first I'd learned we'd been put onto a team where the sergeant of that team was not necessarily liked by the senior sergeant. There were other issues there that I was not privy to because it all happened prior to us coming to the station. However, I'm told, or was told at the time, that I was considered a problem child, and that by putting me on his team, this would potentially create more issues for the sergeant, making him look worse. So it was kind of like they were getting a twofold. Now, this disgusted me because I was like, how dare they? How dare they, one, refer to me as a problem child when I was the victim of bullying and harassment and the reason I was leaving the station. And not that I actually made that aware to anybody. Like when I applied for the transfer, my sergeant signed off on it. There was no word as far as I was concerned that I'd made any allegations of bullying and harassment. So the fact that this was already an issue, that I was being called a problem child, really got under my skin. Secondly, one of my bullies from Leonora, his mate had recently moved to Narrogin before us in one of the other tenure lifted positions, and he'd decided to share stories about me, clearly from his mate, but he didn't even know me. So the fact that he was sharing these stories as like he knew everything, that pissed me off, because I was like, dude, you got no idea even who I am and like what the scenario is. Thirdly, the female constable who I didn't feel safe with working in Leonora, one of her team members from Perth had also transferred to Narrogin in one of those tenure lifted positions. Fourthly, one of the officers at Narrogin was related to an officer who had been stationed at one of the MFPFs out on the lands. So there was a further connection. So I felt like I had no reprieve, that everyone had spoken badly about me, everybody had something to say, but worse still, no one who knew me from a bar of soap chose to try to get to know me and see what type of person or type of officer I really was. They were literally going on the hearsay of other people. And so I was just appalled at that type of behaviour. In saying that though, there were a handful or less than a handful of officers who actually did try to get to know me And I was grateful for their support and their friendship during my time at the station. Then came the bullying from the senior sergeant due to COVID-related issues, but I'm not going to get to that on this particular podcast. So in all, it wasn't a great start to my new location. There were so many links back to the goldfields, and it really seemed like I was just not going to get the fresh start that I was hoping for. The room would go silent when I entered it. I was not included in conversations. I wasn't told directly about stuff in relation to the station and the community. And this was a real obvious comparison when I compared it to how everyone else welcomed and spoke with my husband. Like, there was a real disparity between how they reacted and spoke with him and how they reacted and spoke with me. I was thankful at least that they didn't include him in their behaviour towards me, but it really did make things difficult for him because he could see what was happening and he knew what I was going through. I'm also going to say that I had to deal with some sexual discrimination type behaviour when a group of junior male officers would attempt to gang up on me while we were on duty and attending incidents. And this was despite the fact that I was the most senior officer on duty at the time, apart from the sergeants back in the station. And they were just reluctant to take direction from me. They would contact each other by phone, and I was basically told that we're just going here. And multiple occasions I had to pull them aside, speak to them and say, no, this is not on. Like, we don't operate in this way. And yet it seemed to continue on multiple shifts. And then given all the issues I already had with the senior sergeant, I just didn't believe that I could approach him with anything regarding the bullying type behaviour. So I felt very much on my own. I was always told to toughen up, or it comes with the job, or people are just joking. And the culture of the agency for me then was just abhorrent. I was like, I don't even know how this type of behaviour is allowed to go on in the agency. At this point in time, the bullying and harassment policy was a crock of shit. They may as well not have had it because nobody followed it and nobody acted on it, even if you tried to make a complaint. Then came the incidents. Now, Narrogin was quite a busy town. It's of a country town of about 4,500 people. There is quite a large Indigenous population in the town, also reasonably transient for the area. And there was just lots of Indigenous fighting, there was lots of drugs, there was lots of family violence. And it was just this never-ending hamster wheel of going to this job after job after job with no reprieve. And I felt like it was worse than the city. I don't know, the city seemed to have some flexibility, but these country towns, it was like, whoa, I did not expect this much work in this space of time. I didn't have to work with my hubby as much, even though we were on the same team. However, I often preferred working with him over the other colleagues in my team, as I felt safer with my hubby. Like, I knew without a doubt he would have my back. No questions asked. There's two main incidents I look back on when I look at my time at Narrogin. The first was not long after we arrived. It was only a couple of weeks. So you can imagine my nervous system and my hypervigilance and my safety were already they were already heightened because of what I'd experienced in Leonora. So on this particular day, I was required to escort St John Ambulance and convey an aggressive female Indigenous mental health patient over to Bunbury, which was a 2-hour drive away. And she was known for violent outbursts. So I had to travel in the back of the ambulance with her and a nurse, and the St John Ambulance crew were in the front of the vehicle. But I had to remain hyper vigilant for that entire 2-hour trip just to ensure our safety. And I was just so tense and worked up by the time I got back into the car with the sergeant who had followed us over in the police car that I really went home that night and struggled. Like, I cannot keep dealing in this way. Like, if that's what jobs are going to be like here, then I'm fucked. Like, this is going to be hard. And then the other incident that comes to mind is I can remember sitting in the station and there was a group of us, but I was working with a probationary constable, and we had been discussing offences in the criminal code and a section that refers to a charge of being challenged by a duel or challenged to a duel. Now, this young probationary constable, thought it was hilarious and wondered if a recent series of fights that were breaking out in the Indigenous community could actually affect this charge. And then later that evening, we were called to a mental health incident in a neighbouring town. And the person we were called to assist with was a male of a very large build and over 6 foot tall. Now, the probationary officer took charge, and I did allow him to. I kind of stepped back and thought, I wonder how this male-to-male interaction will go, hoping that he could keep the peace as opposed to him taking direction from a female. And sometimes you have to do that in certain situations with, mental health or family domestic violence or drug-induced incidents. You do have to weigh out who's the best officer to approach. But as I watched and listened to how this officer seemed to be talking to the male, he seemed to be inciting him rather than calming him down. And I really wondered to myself if this whole idea of challenging somebody to a duel was on his mind and making him play out that scenario completely differently. But it was really making the male patient more aggressive, and it ended up resulting with us wrestling him on the ground, trying to detain him to be able to go in the back of the ambulance. And I felt really unsafe during this time. There's nothing worse than having to wrestle somebody on the ground in any situation, but a large mental health male just adds to it. And the fact that, my nervous system and stuff was not going okay anyway, just further added to all of that. I also questioned my own authority during this job, wondering if I could have handled anything differently. Should I have just taken control at the beginning of the job so it didn't escalate to that point, because that probationary officer ended up being spat on. After most shifts, I was still going home in tears. I would find myself having 1, maybe 2 drinks after work, every night after work, just to calm my nerves. And at every opportunity, I was going up to Perth and seeing my kids, basically just getting out of town. Like, I couldn't stand to be in a place that I felt unsafe. This all escalated on Saturday, the 13th of November, 2021. It was around 3 months after transferring to Narrogin, and I was on duty at the station with my sergeant. And we were in the station doing some paperwork as the sergeant had some stuff to catch up on. The town was relatively quiet with not a lot of jobs on, so it gave him the opportunity to do that. And as we were sitting in the station, 2 of the officers from another team came into the station, coming back from another job. And despite the fact that, apart from the sergeant, I was the only other colleague in the station, they practically ignored me. And I was just like, yeah, righto, mate, same shit that I've got to deal with. But then one of their phones rang, and it rang with the same ringtone as I had used in Leonora for my recalls. And as I sat at my desk, I panicked, thinking that I was being recalled for another job. And it took a couple of seconds for me to realise, hold on a minute, I'm actually at work. Like, this is not a recall. We're here in the station. But I could begin to feel a panic attack, start. Then the CAD desk alerted a priority 2 job for the district. And immediately my thought went to no, this is a recall, because there's the priority 2 alert that says there's a recall, because you were only ever recalled for priority 2 incidents. So the next thing I know is I'm sitting on the floor in the female toilet crying, and having a full-blown panic attack. Nothing had ever happened to me like this before. I can remember sitting almost like in that fetal position with my arms hugged around my knees, crying, going, what the fuck is going on? Why do I feel like this? I don't even know how I'm going to finish my shift. And to be honest, I don't know how I got through the rest of my shift. But that was the last time I ever put on my uniform. On the Monday, I made an appointment to see the local doctor, and I told them it was urgent. And that doctor diagnosed me with severe PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I don't like to use the D. I say I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. But he immediately referred me to a psychiatrist in Perth. But because there was a wait time, I was referred to see a psychologist in the meantime. And I was given time off work. Now, I saw the psychologist via Zoom because obviously the difference between Narrogin and Perth is a 2-hour drive one way. But I was doing that until I could see the psychiatrist in early December. He confirmed the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, but he gave me a month off work to see how I felt and to spend some time with the family over Christmas. And I really did appreciate that, to just take some time for myself to see how I would go. In the new year, when I saw him again, we discussed some treatment plans, and I was admitted to Perth Clinic for assessment and cognitive behaviour therapy as an outpatient. The way the agency reacted to this was something I did not expect. Like, it's bad enough that you're being told that you have a psychological issue or a mental health issue and that you're going to be admitted to a mental health hospital, because as an officer, you work with mental health patients. You see what they go through, and the last thing you want to identify with is being like one of them. I kid you not. Your confidence, self-worth, everything you know about yourself just goes beneath you because you're like, wow, it's come to this. But I was questioned about the severity of my situation. And despite the medical certificate from my psychiatrist, it's not a general doctor, it's a psychiatrist, I was asked for extra proof of my condition. I asked them back if being admitted to Perth Clinic, psychiatric hospital, was enough evidence. And their response to that was, who's paying for it? I was just flabbergasted, like, are you freaking kidding me? That's your comeback? Now, in this instance, my medical insurance meant I had no out-of-pocket expenses. But I was just appalled by the accusations and the behaviour from the agency. And so at this time, I made a point of filing a workplace health and safety incident to receive a workers' compensation claim number so that I knew that I would never have to pay any medical expenses moving forward. At this time, I knew that for the agency, I was just a number. I was not a person. They didn't give a shit about me or my condition or whether I would return to work in one piece. They just wouldn't do anything to help me. And so at this point, I knew I was on my own. I spent a lot of time in Perth at our Perth home as it was closer to medical appointments. So my psychologist, my psychiatrist, and my general practitioner. But it was also closer to my kids and extended members of my family. So I felt like I would have the support going through this. But let me tell you, it put immense strain on my marriage and immense strain on my family, because my insomnia, the nightmares, the mood swings, the anger towards the agency, and even just the ability to function were taking its toll. And as a mother, I hated being this vulnerable and this low to my kids. Like, as a mother, you're supposed to be the pillar of strength. You're supposed to lead by example with your kids. But here I was, just an absolute shadow of the person, like the strong, tough woman who had raised these two kids on her own and who had become a police officer, had literally disappeared. I had no idea who I was. My depression and anxiety meant that I wasn't motivated to do anything. I wasn't engaging in normal activities, and I just didn't want to engage socially. Like, I became reclusive. Now, I chose not to be medicated during this time because I really saw that was a Band-Aid fix. Now, I know that that's not the case for a lot of people, but for me, I just felt like, no, I don't want to be numb to the pain. I want to heal. Like, I want to go back to this job that I loved. That's how I thought it would turn out. So what I was trying to do in the meantime was try a variety of alternate therapies, none of which was paid by the agency, I might add, because unless I chose the allopathic medicated route, they weren't going to pay for anything. So that was all out of my own pocket. I did have to see my GP, my doctor, every fortnight just to obtain a medical certificate to remain off work. And let me tell you, I got no assistance from the Health and Welfare Department. It was almost like they didn't want to know me. I was given the guidance of a return to work consultant, and she literally became my mediator with the agency. Like, I would send my doctor's certificates from her, and the only thing I would know is basically speaking through her. That was the only contact I had with anybody in relation to the agency. Around this time, in my very depressive state, we sold our house. And this is something like a big decision like that I do not recommend under stress, because if I was put in the same scenario now, would I have sold my house? Maybe not. But when you're under that kind of pressure, I just didn't want the extra burden. So moving back to Narrogin as our only home was one of the hardest things I had to do. Like, we built that house. I designed every aspect of it. It was my sanctuary. It was a place that I felt safe. So to give all that up and go back to just a WAPOL government-owned house was really tough. My husband also returned to work after having a period of time off to care for me. And let me tell you, I am so grateful that he was able to have that time off as a carer for me, because I don't think I would have coped on my own. But when he went back to work, I was so often at home alone. This was when I hit my rock bottom. The depression and anxiety caused agoraphobia to the point where I could barely get out of bed to function, let alone walk out my front door. And it was around this time as well that the WAPOL psychiatrist diagnosed me with major depressive disorder. And I was having appointments with her as well. She stated that I should apply for medical retirement because she believed I would never return to the job that I once loved. It was about a year after being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress that the return to work consultant told me that her services were no longer required, as I would be starting the medical retirement process. But for the next 102 days, and I'm not kidding when I say that, I never heard from anybody at WA Police. I was told that I was starting the medical retirement process, but nobody contacted me, nobody checked in with me, nobody told me what was going on about the process for 102 days. My only contact with anybody during that time was me sending an email every fortnight with the required medical certificate. On top of that, I wasn't hearing from anybody at the local station level either. No one cared. I was literally on my own. It wasn't until late February that I was finally contacted by the agency because I needed to be reassessed by the WAPOL appointed psychiatrist because it was out of date. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. It's 102 days since you last contacted me. Did you lose my file? Was I not important? What the fuck? But her diagnosis at that point was unchanged. And again, I was told I would be considered for medical retirement. And at this point, I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea what was going on. I was just like, what do you do? But it was around this time also that I had made a choice for myself. Under the guidance of my psychologist and my general practitioner, I was going to hike the Bibbulmun track end to end, the whole 1,000 kilometres as part of my healing journey. And I didn't do this lightly, but I just felt like nothing else was going my way. Nothing else was working. Nobody gave a shit. I was not the person I used to be. And the only way I could find myself again and dig myself out of this hole I'd gotten myself into was to undertake this journey. The week before I set off on the track, I'd still heard nothing from the agency. So I phoned them and I told them, you know what? I'm going bush. I'm going offline. Apart from having my regular check-ins with my psychologist and my doctor during that time, I wasn't available because I was tired of waiting for them to assist me. And I knew that the only person who could get through this was me. Now, there is more to the story about how the rest of my time ended with Narrogin Police Station and what happened after that with my medical retirement. But I am going to leave that for part 8 of the series. So the conclusion of the WAPOL series will give you the conclusion of my time with WA Police. Thank you for tuning in to the Everyday Warriors podcast. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share yourself, then please message me, as I am always up for real, raw, and authentic conversations with other everyday warriors. If you love what you are hearing, please be sure to subscribe and hear all the latest episodes, and spread word to your family, friends and colleagues so they can listen in too. If you are sharing on social media, please be sure to tag me at _Trudy_Marie_ so I can personally acknowledge you. I am always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you, the listener. It would also mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure that the Everyday Warrior podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.